Everyone. Good timing. Yes. So welcome to our third advisory committee meeting. For those who will be watching, this from the public, Commissioner James Rouse, Department of Planning and Community Development, here with our planning team, our comprehensive planning consultants from MUD Workshop, Hudson Valley Plan for Progress, and AKRF. And today we're joined by Councilmember Edward Bertit. Would you like to say a couple words, Councilmember?
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, MUD. Thank you, advisory board members, for being here. We are getting towards the end of the phase one process, so I hope as advisory board members that you're proud of the process so far. We have our last general public meeting on June 29th, and then I am looking forward to the final plan coming out later on during the summer. Thank you for your participation, and thank you for being here. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. So tonight we're going to start by going over timeline status of what we've done so far, and we'll allow the consultant team to present some findings based on the first public workshop, the roundtables that we have had, both business and real estate, that we've been able to synthesize together, as well as just all the information we gathered through the community conversations we've had throughout the year thus far. So we are near, as Councilmember Poteet mentioned, we are nearing the end of the first phase. Thus far, we have had 9 community conversations, 1 public workshop, 2 roundtables. We will be having our final public workshop for the first phase on June 29th at the Sinai Free Synagogue at 6:30 p.m. So at this workshop, the consultant team will it'll be similar to the first public workshop, or it will be interactive, but we will be presenting findings, early design, recommendations, massing, just to kind of get a sense of, well, not massing, but just kind of a density distribution explanation, and getting feedback on how we would like to proceed, where there are priority areas. After which point, during the summer, we'll take this information back and work with the consultant team to have a draft for September for City Council to review with us, us being Planning Department, to consider for formal adoption. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to MUD Workshop.
Thank you, James. And on the next slide, I want to just start with recapping that this first phase of the project, of the comprehensive planning work that we've been doing, is not just in a bubble, because we've been, along with the city planning, conducting a lot of outreach. And this is just a recap of all of the outreach that we've done with you guys and with other members in the community. So before I proceed today, I want to just talk about what it is that we're here to do and discuss today. At the last advisory committee meeting, we started to talk a little bit about the land use, the zoning, and the densities in light of the feedback that we received from the community members, and also the feedback that we received from you all. So on the 29th of June, we are going to go back with a preliminary presentation that gives an overview of what we've heard and what are the different strategies that the comprehensive plan can recommend that can then revitalize downtown. So we've gone ahead and we're going to walk you through the summary of the feedback that we received from up to this point. Then we're going to introduce the 6 revitalization strategies for downtown. And then we are going to talk a little bit about what the community workshop is going to look like, and have a discussion with you as to whether, we should present things in the way that we're talking about it, or massage it and change it a little bit. And at each step, I'll be going over what is really the purpose of, the community workshop, what we're trying to get out of it, what is the purpose of all of the work that, and how to kind of like structure the feedback also so that we can make the most use of it. So if we could please switch. So this map here, and I understand if it is not very clear to everyone, I'll walk everyone through it. Or maybe if you want, you could sit a little closer to the screen. But what we heard at the last presentation, at the last advisory committee meeting from, are you gonna make that bigger, Catherine?
Don't be shy, guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get this done.
Okay, thank you. So we're seeing 3 different zones here, right? 3 different zones on this map and 2 different dashed lines. The darker dashed line that you see on the board, on this map, is the original boundary of downtown that we had put out in front of the community and in front of all of you to ask if this is what you consider the downtown. And there is a lighter boundary that is extending out that you see towards Lincoln Avenue, and then further down to 4th Street, East 4th Street, that is an extension of what people said in the community workshop that the downtown should be expanded to. Now, we haven't gone ahead and done that just yet, because from our conversations with you at the last advisory committee meeting, we gathered that the downtown boundary should stay as it was originally proposed. So I want to just stop right here and ask if that is something anybody wants to comment on.
Are you taking into account the comments that on the forms that we filled out at the homework assignment? Extend the boundary to East 7th Street?
Two?
If these streets were labeled?
Yes, yes, yes,
It's
you're
a
absolutely right. I
little
don't know why the
difficult to-
labels are not on here, and I apologize for that. But yes, East 3rd is also extending further east. You see the part that's coming out?
Yeah,
That is East 3rd.
but is that part of the original? It wasn't.
It
right?
was part of the
Oh, it
original.
was? Okay.
Yeah. So East 3rd definitely is going all the way. From what I heard, if you see on the west side on East 1st, that is something that everybody agreed with, to extend it out and include the block, one block on either side of Metro North. So is that something we still want to consider, or no?
In my opinion, sense, because right now across from Metro North Tracks are some trucking buildings and a landscaping company. And
In
it's-
the north,
Sorry?
to the north of the Metro Tracks? Because to the north of Metro Tracks,
no,
we
it's not.
noticed
It's
our
to the
1-story,
Yeah,
uh,
it's on the south.
and on the south side there are, yeah.
So is this including the south side of Metro North?
Definitely to the
Okay.
south of Metro North, I understand, but I just want everyone to consider to the north of Metro Tracks. And that we observe are typically like 1-story or, yeah, much smaller buildings, and seemed residential with, or like mostly residential,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
But there's a lot of
Are
commercial.
we also talking about the density here or just the area?
Right.
No, I'm just saying that on the north side, there is commercial buildings there, restaurant, auto body shop, supermarkets, and then the opposite way is going, it's all residential.
It's
It's
residential,
all
yeah,
residential.
yeah. On the west
Buildings
side
and
is all
and
residential.
houses,
Yeah,
just
you're right.
storage farms.
Are you including those Art Deco buildings by the bridge? By the bridge there?
The Art Deco buildings by the bridge are included, but what I'm referring to is, do we have a pointer? What I'm referring to is from here to here. Our suggestion is that this part, this bit of the block makes sense to be included in the downtown, but this part of the block does not make as much sense to be included in the downtown because of the nature of uses over there, primary residential and very, very low scale, 1-story. So I know that it was extended out, but we suggest that we take only the southern portion.
I agree, we don't want to encroach on any current residential areas.
It is a mix. It's not just residential, and they are not 1-story at all. But, you know, this side. We can all, I would also just like to call out the other areas. I know that this is something that was not received very well at the at the second advisory committee meeting, but that we wanted to only include this part of the street leading to the park. And I just want to confirm that that's okay. Currently, there are 4 zoning districts in in the entire area that you're looking at. And there isn't necessarily, we're not looking at it from the point of view of whether the zoning is going to be impacted or we're going to have to change it. The way we're analyzing the zoning is whether it is restrictive in achieving the feedback that we've received, as in, is mixed use allowed or is it restricted? Is residential restricted? So currently in the entire downtown area, residential is a restricted use. So we're not necessarily analyzing zoning as to we're going to change it, but what are the restrictions that would be relaxed? Right.
But we never really discussed to what extent we're going to allow an increase in residential density, because there's a general consensus from the public workshops that we do not
Yes.
want more density.
Yes, and I'm going to come to that, Jane. There is a range of feedback on that, but we'll come to that. We're at the downtown boundary, and I just want to, finish that first. Yeah.
So the question right now is whether the downtown boundary should stop right before Hartley Park.
And
In
have
that-
the street. Just the street.
Just the street, but not the block around the circle or any of that.
Take this block and not Hartley Park, or just take this. So that's the question. Should we include this? Or should we just include it doesn't really make as much sense to include just the street.
There are quite a few residential co-ops in that area. I don't know that they would be happy about seeing themselves as part of downtown.
The
The exact place you just pointed out, adjacent from Hartley Park, is this new construction that is being built right now, where once was this deli burned down, and that one. And the other building on that one side is the school. If it helps the school safety, to consider that block as downtown and include whatever, traffic mediation you're going to do, I would include it. If it heightens the safety and like maybe the entry point, do I want to drive into that street or not? I mean, it would behoove us to extend for that respect. And to that note, on the west extension along First Street or on the other side of the tracks where we have an eye doctor and a whole bunch of doctors. And then there's like, I think the plumbing business and some parking lots and stuff. I think if it helps the further extension, which is a lot of business going on down, what is this, Vernon Avenue? If it helps to smooth the connection to that end, I would include it. I'm always thinking, back walk from here over there, it would be a nicer walk if it's thought through.
I think that's a really good point. It's the continuity.
One way to think about downtown is a recognizable district with a mix of uses that are relevant to all residents and visitors as well. So do you necessarily, and this recognizable district, this recognizable mixed use district isn't necessarily the only place where capital improvements are going to happen. Capital improvements such as streetscape and traffic improvements can also happen outside of the downtown. But having a defined downtown will help with several future, could help structure several future economic development, governance, and we'll get to it in a bit. And I would think of it a little bit more in terms of what is a recognizable district that can be walkable. Doesn't mean that the block right outside of it cannot be walkable or receive capital improvements. Does that make sense?
Is that the part of West First, like going towards Chase Bank and all of that over here that you're talking about on West First? Yes. Yeah, because I see in the middle, you have the Gramerton and South Fourth Avenue right there. So is that where that is? Okay, so being that it's in the middle, if you go left, that would be West First, which is the corner of Chase, where Chase is on the corner. So then that's where the Chase is. So after that is what you're referring to? Okay. So the question is, do we want to include it or not include it, or? Okay.
A lot of people enter Mount Vernon from here, right? And on East First. And we also want to kind of, be able to think about where they enter and where they exit. But we also think that this is kind of like a gateway. And this intersection particularly, where there is barely 50, 75 feet of space between two turns is kind of a dangerous intersection. But that does have a potential to become for a traffic improvement priority.
My next question would be for this area right here, because I see now there are a lot of stores there, well, were there, but now they're just idle with building permit signs on it with companies that were scheduled to be there. So is that something that I guess we can all look into to make sure that whatever businesses do go there are sustained long enough to stay there and they manage the upkeep of the outside and the inside as well?
Yes, and that's going to be part of an economic development strategy. Yes, but then having a downtown boundary may potentially then give a little bit more flexibility in being able to control that aspect that you just spoke about. Okay. All right. So I think so that was one, but as I understand, everybody is in this extension, everybody was happy with. It was also extended to the south, right? However, at the previous meeting, I heard that we should limit the businesses in the south, but I think we want to keep it. Just want to confirm that too. Businesses in the south, there was you see that gray line in between, south of South 3rd Street did not want to include those businesses, but so there was a 50-50 wanted to include these businesses in here, right? South 3rd Avenue, yeah. No, street, the street, South 3rd Street. You
Yeah,
see this
this one
extension
here.
out here? And you see that line? Want to keep
Right.
3rd
East 3rd.
Street? Huh?
What were some of the reasons?
Based on staff, this was a staff recommendation based on conversations we've heard from both interested property owners in the area, and just kind of when we had community conversations, people asked just like, well, what's happening with 3rd Street? And so based on that, we had proposed that it be extended down between Fulton to 6th.
I mean, it doesn't feel very downtown. It doesn't feel very downtown, and if you are going to have a downtown district, it should kind of have that feel. But you know, there again, I think it's about everybody wants to be included into this opportunity, but perhaps maybe the department can identify, you know, its own hub at a later date as we kind of create these zones within the city planning of the business districts. Maybe it has its own special aspect, but I get it. It's kind of tough, but I get
right,
it.
James? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think some of the feedback that we heard was just that, right? It wasn't downtown as in the sense that when you were further north of downtown, but it wasn't quite outside of downtown in the other neighborhoods, and they didn't want to lose that and wanted to be able to kind of relate to both. That's what I understood some of the conversations to be.
Comment from council's point of view, probably the most problematic corridor that we hear about is 3rd Street.
Mhm.
You know, everyone's clear 4th Avenue is downtown and should be developed. Everyone's clear about Gramerton. People are fairly clear about Sanford, but probably our weakest commercial corridor by far is actually 3rd Street. And so, and then also too, talking about a gateway street, that takes you straight into Pelham. So we also have a lot of traffic coming from Pelham through 3rd Street into Mount Vernon. I would like it to be in there only because we need some direction from council's point of view as to what we should do on 3rd Street, because we're getting a lot of differing voices.
Again,
So what should happen on 3rd Street?
I don't think we disagree on any of that. It's just a matter of, is this the end all be all for, you know, downtown? You
Let me-
know,
let
or
me be-
is there something else that can be created just for that? So, you know.
So just one other quick comment. There's currently zoning on 3rd Street that was signed off in previous councils that a lot of people are not happy about.
they're not happy about.
They are not happy about it. So getting direction from the community sooner than later would be helpful, because as of right now, there's as of right zoning that a lot of people in the community are not happy with.
So would that change if it were to be, it being included? Yes.
Yeah, so let me, because the issue here, what right now, what I'm hearing is one of branding. And what I mean by that is that branding and how we've marketed and pitched this. So this is phase one.
Mhm.
And we have marketed as like, we're going to focus on the downtown area. And this isn't like a challenge to anyone, just where's downtown?
Mhm.
Where are the exact boundaries of downtown?
Mhm.
No one can exactly define that. And so one thing I've said very early on is, just at the mayor's behest, we took our best shot at trying to define what downtown is. And then the mayor had said, well, if we're going to do this, we should include some city-owned properties to consider, because the reason phase one was happening was just the amount of development pressure. That was one reason, was the amount of development pressure in the downtown area, which I say is loosely defined. And because, we've always said downtown is something everyone around Mount Vernon is interested in improving. And so when we heard from property owners along 3rd Street saying, well, what about that? What about us? You're focusing on 3rd Street on 3rd, 4th, and 5th Avenues. Well, we're just outside of that. When is that going to happen? And we've heard in the community conversation just last week, I had someone come up to me saying, are you looking at 3rd Street at all? Saying, yes, we actually extended it because we've heard some interest about what's happening, along 3rd Street. And we felt, okay, we'll include this in the conversation. So at the end of the day, we're not branding everything here as downtown. I mean, that can be determined. We're saying, okay, this is downtown, and saying, well, the 3rd Street sub-district, for lack of a better phrase at the moment, can be included. And we can look at sub-districts or separate districts and how that's classified. There won't be like a downtown zoning district that encompasses all of this. There'll be a downtown core area where we will come up with, density recommendations at this moment, which will lead to zoning recommendations that council will consider. Because at the end of this process, the entire process, the city's going to reevaluate the entire zoning ordinance and how we approach zoning. So I just want to clarify that, because I know it's caused some confusion, and that's the way, we own that we have pitched it thus far, but it doesn't necessarily mean like 3rd Street and Lincoln Avenue are downtown, because some people might take umbrance, obviously, to that, because that's not really downtown, but it's where there's interest or pressure or what we've heard in the community thus far.
US to 4th Avenue, like Robin, that block you're in, if you go up, you're on 3rd Street. And it impacts your desire to go on your part of 4th Avenue, because that part of 3rd Street is so abysmal. So I think it should be. If it's not, it's about how far it extends. And there are parts of these streets that are more contiguous to the core that probably should be included, because it impacts what's going to actually be attractive to getting into the core. But if you go too far from it, then it's a different kind of scope.
Yeah, no, we agree with that, because we've heard some feedback that goes as far as, why are you including Mount Vernon East train station? That's not downtown. It's like, how are people going to get down? When people travel, that's how they get there. It's like only Gramerton and South 4th can be considered downtown. So even where we are right now, some people don't consider downtown. It's only that we've heard 1 or 2 comments. I'm just saying, like, of all the comments we've heard. So that's why I'm saying I don't want to, characterize people as being particular, but people have their own ideas and definitions of that. And so part of this process is identifying that. And just as I said, with the other areas we've heard, we, as a group here, as a collective here, and then the work that we do here has to synthesize that and say, okay, at the end of the day, this is what we've heard as like the true downtown, and these are other important districts that have either special interest or pressure placed upon them, if that makes sense. So,
I think we can proceed on that basis, just with the understanding that Third Street is a very different environment from Fourth. And
yes,
it needs a different type of action plan.
yes,
So Commissioner, so just to recap, so for the sake of the comprehensive plan, we have yet to define where exactly downtown is, correct?
correct. It's this, you know, I said we came up initially with a 40 block, more or less, area that we said, okay, this is the downtown, this is the phase one area, which we had identified as quote unquote downtown. And then I said, well, from what we heard, we extended to about, 50 blocks. And then there's additional areas that we've heard saying, well, I include Lincoln. Well, I include this area that maybe a lot of other people would not. And so it's just looking and trying to kind of saying, okay, this is what we've heard from this. What do we consider? It doesn't mean we discard all the other areas. It means just saying, okay, well, these areas need different attention. Obviously the areas around Mount Vernon East train station will, face a different approach, different analysis, different density distribution than along East Third Street, because it's that's more of an core neighbor. Third Street is more of a core neighborhood district, as opposed to a transit oriented type of development that would develop around the train station.
Because I have to run, but that I do want to make about Third Street. Council's position has been to allow development as of right. If something is zoned currently, we aren't the ones to say, well, it shouldn't happen, right? The problem with Third Street is that Third Street currently has zoning. And so if it's not in this plan, council doesn't have any direction from the community as to what it wants. The only direction we have is the current zoning, which is on the books, which again, from 70% of the people that I've talked to, they find it problematic. It's MX1.
There's different zones along Third Street, because we've had applications for Third Street that currently do not allow multifamily residential use or intense retail use. Whereas 2 or 3 blocks away, it's allowed, and saying, well, it's 3 blocks away, why not just allow it? And it's like, well, the current zoning does not allow for it. So it needs to be considered for a rezoning, thus why we are in this comprehensive planning process.
I'm glad you elaborated a little bit, and what you said earlier too, as far as how do I approach Mount Vernon? I'm coming from Pelham and I'm driving in. When do I feel like I'm getting there? And that's a very important strip. If this is like all residential, I'm never gonna find Mount Vernon like the downtown. So I'm understanding now what you're trying to do with where do we start from when you come from the Bronx or from Pelham. And I think for me, my opinion is we need to include it because this MX1 was like nowhere near putting it in context.
I agree. All right. In the interest of time, I'd really like to move on to an overview of what the, can we go back to the last slide? The densities also on this map. So I think we were all very clear that we want to maintain a 4-story, nothing higher than 4-story, a 4-story or a tall 4-story all along South Fourth and Gramerton Avenues. And that's what you see here. It's not what we have, but that's the maximum that one could go. Maintain a village feel is what we had
And so
heard,
just
a village character and a village feel with maximum height being 4 stories.
there are currently properties that have 3 stories along there that are not utilized property. And, in considering, the ability to rehabilitate some of those properties or tear down some of those properties, it gives greater incentive to do a mixed use type of development, because currently, technically you can't do that right now. And if I'm a property owner who's sat on the property for 40 years, it's like, well, what incentive do I have? And in order to maintain that feel, but give the incentive to rehabilitate that property, improve the character, and allow for additional, direct foot traffic, which improves, just the overall environment and energy along South Fourth and Gramerton, that this does give, that opportunity. Because if you go on the Gramerton side, there are some buildings taller, more than 4 stories there, but those would be, grandparented in, and while allowing for, additional opportunity without saying, okay, you want to get, maximum best use, build 8 stories there. No one wants to see that. It has both sides may be different, but they're intrinsically linked, and they both have a nice village type of feel and character. And so this lends to that and gives new opportunity for an improved experience along both corridors.
I think we need to define specifically the number of stories that are acceptable, because to say mid-rise, who defines that? And also with the high rise, it's not a term, or high density. It's not a term that I have heard anywhere in our conversation. No one wants a high rise here. No one wants high density. So I think we need to be very specific in our definitions.
Yes, I think part of this process is also trying to figure out what those mean. On either side of the maximum 4-story blocks in the center, on the south side, the ones that you see hatched here, and we floated this idea the last time, we're thinking more of up to 8 stories of building, but not in the main downtown corridor, on the blocks that flank it in the south, on the southern end. And as James mentioned, that will allow for some of the improvements and the desires that we've heard from you and from the community.
Because just looking at this map, if I were a developer trying to interpret this, I could easily fit in this 26-story building that we know is in the waiting room.
So just to be clear, Jane, you're asking for just definitions of what we are discussing in terms of
in terms of height of the buildings in particular, and also, what does high density mean? How many units per acre? What are we talking about? We need to make it really, really clear to both the community and the city council when it takes a look at this, and to the developers who may be thinking about coming to downtown, that this is exactly what we mean.
Yeah, so we have discussed that, and I'm just trying to call up just the document that we have that we were discussing it with. When we're talking about high density, the range we were looking at were 12 to 20-story buildings. We've heard, people up to 30 stories want to propose, but we've heard feedback. And so we're trying to narrow the definition of what there are 20-story buildings in the city, but just trying to use that as a definition of, where to start from with that. And what do we have here?
The medium density is 8 to 12 stories, but on the southern side, when we've been, kind of thinking about modeling this, we're somewhere in the range of 8 stories, 10 stories, but it's also difficult to have every block be the same. So yeah, up to 8 stories, could be up to 10 stories, but that's the range that we're looking at for medium density.
Okay.
For low density, 4 stories is the maximum limit. And for high density, it's 12 to 20 stories. But again, it would be a 12 to 20 stories. It's a range. We have to really look into at a higher resolution where the property is, what does it do, and several other considerations, right? Like, what do we really want there? Do we want mixed income housing? Do we want affordable housing? Can we incentivize that? Do we want to have improvements in the adjacent block, or do we want to have new open space that comes out of this new development? So can that be incentivized by an extra story or 2-story? So I think that the range is between 12 to 20, but then, you know, on a case-by-case basis, we'll need to look at each.
I don't recall anybody recommending 20. I heard 12 as a maximum.
We are just defining what each low, medium, and high density are. So we're just defining what that means.
Right.
And we are open to feedback in terms of the definitions we are proposing.
How many people we want to add to the city? Because if we're building, you know, high density, medium density, it has to be against some vision for the number of additional population the town can accommodate, economic contribution, getting to some kind of critical mass. I mean, is there like a strategy around that? Because it's all financial in the end. And is it worth it to have this density and development? And how do we make it worthwhile in terms of return to the city?
I mean, this is part of why we're doing the process. So this is something we need
Uh,
to discuss.
Also, the fire department should be asked, how far should we go up?
Yes, I think it'll have to be a combination of infrastructure, what is feasible, physically, financially, and feasible in terms of, and what is the benefit to the city and the people. Up to this point, we have really been working with the listening to all the desires and, you know, the direction and the vision that people want to take it in. And, you know, density is not the only tool in a comprehensive plan to be able to achieve all of the goals that we have. And I want to walk us through the other slides as well that address the 6 revitalization goals or strategies and get your feedback on that. But that does address not just this, but on the other 2 slides, if we flip through it really quickly, some of the other issues like excessive commercial truck parking, storefront and sidewalks in downtown that are unkept. And on the next slide, some of the vacancy and lack of identity and character. So if you go to the next slide, we've been in the background doing some studies to, and Adam, feel free to jump in if you want to, but really looking at the this from the point of view of not just physically what is downtown, but also in terms of you know, the business mix and the economic development direction, as well as the zoning. So do you want to ask a question now? Can I finish the presentation? Yeah. So there are approximately 130 storefronts and but only 90 operating businesses in the downtown area. It's a very high vacancy rate, 30%, should be approximately 10% for a healthy downtown. And the business mix really is, you know, 24 plus 13, it's 37% is really businesses that we've heard not everybody goes to or needs, because it's hair salons. And so that's what we've under health and personal care and clothing and accessories. And then the challenges for revitalization that we've heard is that there isn't really a critical mass of people to attract the kind of business mix that everybody is.
You have the mic in your hand, please. Thank you.
I just got excited. I apologize. But there's a high density in the downtown, but it's senior housing all around the downtown area. So when you have a high level of, or a high number of people with, fixed income.
This is actually something that is another thing, like what is the mix that we want? What type of housing do we want if we want more housing in downtown? If you go to the next slide, actually, you will see that we did look at the zoning analysis of the downtown area, and there are unusual restrictions within the downtown. You cannot have fast food and carry-out restaurants are prohibited, but also museums are prohibited in CB zone. And trade and business schools are prohibited in some areas, banks are prohibited. So we're getting into the details of what uses are permitted, and residential is also prohibited. So it's not just that we need to increase the density for all of downtown and make this downtown, a really high density area that maybe shades parks or nobody wants to go to. It totally changes the character of Mount Vernon. No, that's not what we're trying to say. What we're trying to say is that there will have to be a combination of strategies and a thoughtful distribution of density in certain places so that the places that we care about can be maintained or revitalized in the manner that we want to, or the vision that we have for it. So if we go to the next slide, and we can skip after this, these are a list of non-compliant uses. We can skip this too. So I want to get to the, this is a photograph of downtown at 11:12 a.m. You look at South Fourth Street, looking south, there are issues related to the business mix and the zoning and things like that, but there's also no sort of inviting pedestrian streetscape here. The street wall isn't uniform. There is a lot of vacancy. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of like business use spill over onto the sidewalks. People can't really walk. If you go to the next slide, this is 6:15 p.m. on a Sunday, which was not a Memorial Day weekend. And this could actually be places that are restaurants or that are, but has more vitality and has uses that people in Mount Vernon, can spend their money here on the downtown corridor. So keep going to the next slide, please. And the next, I think we get the picture. And then there is, if we go back to the last one, and then there's, we've been doing some studies with regards to what does it really just look and feel like also. So, the identity, how do we identify with it as one district? Wayfinding, same type of, maybe some type of an identity to all of the street furniture that is, that would make and characterize downtown, or wayfinding or street signages that then tells us, okay, you've arrived in downtown. Next slide. I wanted to just also quickly go over some of the findings from the survey. People do really want to see a number of uses such as farmers market, cultural uses and retail shops and restaurants and family entertainment. Those are the uses that they would like to see in the downtown. In the next slide, we asked if there was to be new development in downtown, what would you like the development to have? And restaurants and coffee shops and streetscape and public realm improvements were top two. As a trade-off, right? Like if there were to be new development as a trade-off, what would you like in downtown? Also, and the top priorities for improvement, again, maintaining the store facades and cleanliness. And so some of these are a function of just governance or having a body that can oversee some of this maintenance. And some of it is as James mentioned, there is no mixed use, there is no income generating property for the owner of the building. But by just extending it to 4 stories, maybe the owner can rent out 1 or 2 units and be financially viable and responsible to upkeep his property.
Is there an opportunity to inspire rehabilitation to existing properties? If you look beyond all of the makeshift facades, are beautiful facades. And if we're just inspiring development, allowing people to go up another story or perhaps change it, and we're talking about maintaining a village feel, I think we're missing an opportunity, not inspiring and giving financial incentive for rehabilitation.
So do you mind if I take this one?
Yeah, I want to get to
Okay, go
the
ahead.
strategies and then you can jump in. Great point. I think that, like, as I said, it's a combination of strategies. We just wanted to put density up front because we knew it was going to be the most controversial. But here's some of the other good things that, maybe aren't so controversial, but everybody does want. So what are the structures that we can, and what are the tools that we have to address that? But 6 revitalization guidelines. 1 is defining density and uses in and around the downtown to attract a consumer base and investment to support businesses. So we're really talking about the critical mass here, and that's the real goal. 2nd, reinforcing the identity of South 4th and Gramerton Avenues as the main downtown corridor. 3rd, making transit use efficient and a convenient choice for residents and visitors. This is something that came up quite a bit. Being able to walk in downtown, but also being able to, from the train station, which is so close, get to downtown and walk around in downtown. Repurpose underused lots with interim community uses and integrate them with the urban fabric as they await new development. So there are tons of vacant lots that are adding to the blight, and a lot of them are in downtown. What are interim uses that can be that can happen there, and we need to also talk about who is actually going to initiate that and who's going to maintain that. 5th, creating a recognizable network of open spaces and pedestrian connections for a walkable downtown district. And lastly, developing a business assistance program to target business vacancies and facade disrepair. If you go to the next slide, actually, you could skip all of these 6. Yeah, and go to this one, please. Next slide. Wait, we kind of skipped. Could you keep clicking, Catherine? Forward. Yeah, so backward now, yeah. So this is an animated slide, and I'm wondering if, oh, this is a PDF that you have, so you don't. So on the left side, we have all of the list of things that we've heard that we need, right? Streetscape improvements, public safety, last mile transportation, business. And this is literally taken from the advisory committee meetings and from our meetings with the city council, as well as meeting with the community. Affordable housing, events and programming, and the survey. The survey was very informative. 400 people took that. Historic preservation, street cleaning, parking, facade maintenance, bike lanes, economic jobs, economic and job opportunities, new open spaces and connections, critical mass of people, and aging infrastructure. My apologies, this is a PDF, so you cannot see the animation. But what we wanted to show here is that some of these elements, not all, but some of these elements are something that can be addressed through just governance. And this is where you jump in, Adam.
I guess this is my specialty. So a lot of the questions that I'm hearing tonight related to things like economic development and facade repair and job attraction, retention and growth, and improving the look of downtown. A lot of them get back to 3 questions. What do we want to do? Who's going to do it? And in what sequence are we going to do these things? Because believe it or not, for a lot of this stuff, the sequence matters. There are certain things that have to happen first for the things that follow them to happen at all. I'm going to be very honest with you all. You have had a lot of plans done in this city over the past 12 years, and a lot of those plans are damn good. They have a lot of the elements in them that have been teased out in the public meetings we've had, repeat things that were in the plans already. A lot of the things that we hear from this group and others have been in these past plans already. So one of the things that I think is interesting is to ask the question, if everyone's coming up with the same good ideas over and over again, why aren't they getting done? And that comes back to governance. The reality is that here in Mount Vernon, you do not have a system of governance for economic development and downtown revitalization that other comparable large villages and small cities have to make sure that you're identifying the things that need to be done, who's going to be responsible for them with tactics and deadlines, and in what sequence those things are going to be done. So part of my work on this particular part of the plan is going to be to write that playbook for you. So for example, getting that governance set up is important, but what comes first? Well, one of the things that might come first is, setting up a program through the state that allows certain incentives to be available downtown for developers, to entice developers to come in. One of the things that might have to be set up is the mixed use zoning, because there are certain facade repair programs that are not allowed to be applied unless you have mixed use zoning. Part of what might need to be set up in the beginning is, you might want to look at something like a bid. I don't think you're ready for one yet, but you got to think about it. So I've written down and I've really started to tease out like 12 to 15 different things that you should do and what sequence you should do them in. But without the governance, 0 of them are going to happen. And so we're going to actually write down what that governance should look like too, based on other models from other places that are similar to Mount Vernon that have had success with the governance of the types of programs that you both need and want. So that's sort of the tactics that we're going to bring into this.
Okay, so that's one of the strategies, right? I want to go over all the strategies that we've been thinking about, because you just heard about density, but there's tons more. And again, we're talking implementation now. But these are the things, the things that we really want to get to, right? So how do we do this as a combination of all the strategies? One is governance. On the next slide. Okay. Partnerships, as Adam was mentioning, partnerships. The city government, even if we have the perfect governance, cannot do everything. I think we all have to be part of downtown revitalization, and we all need to figure out, the Merchants Association, if there are partnerships that currently exist. And some of these partnerships, a lot of places, I know that there was conversation about a business improvement district in our advisory committee meetings, but, as Adam was saying, and as some of you said, there's not a lot of buy-in because they don't have proof of concept. Right. And I think that we need to start. So the sequencing, again, we need to start small. We need to start somewhere and demonstrate what small improvements can do for the downtown and the footfall. And then maybe think about a bid 5 years from now. But in the next 1 year, what needs to happen? We want to talk about that. On the third slide, land use zoning and density. We talked about some of this, but it's not just density, it's land use also. And it is all of those restricted uses in the downtown that are preventing critical mass or the business mix that we would like. I think in some places we cannot have cultural institutions, which is also a little bit odd. So, but I know that we want to have, yes.
If the plan makes recommendations that might be contrary to zoning, isn't it possible then to also recommend zoning changes?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that.
We're gonna do that, yeah.
I think that's one of the huge recommendations, right? And I think that's why, and the Commissioner said it, right? That's one of the reasons you do a plan is so then, and the councilman said it, so that you then take that and you put the zoning in place to facilitate this. And that's where you start to get at some of those trade-offs and the defining not just the ranges in density, which, you know, are going to be the headline grabbers, but like what else you do in that land use zoning context to make it fit in with the other strategies that you have in terms of your kind of identity of the area and your street walls and your everything else. How does that really get implemented? So yes.
Okay, and okay. I really want all of us to hold our questions because it is 7:20. I want to make sure we get through all the revitalization guidelines first, and because they're really important, and then we can take questions. I hope that's okay. I'm really sorry. Okay, next slide. Capital improvement projects. Now there's capital improvement projects that need actual, that are places, and you know, it's not just land use, and there are funds that are available at the state level, at the, you know, maybe at the federal level, infrastructure improvements, and also at the city level. So what would some of the capital improvement projects be? Facade maintenance, bike lanes, new open spaces and connections. But street cleaning, for example, that would be something that's much better achieved through partnerships, right? Even if we don't have formal established partnerships. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, can we go back to the ones where we had community outreach? Yeah. So if we go here, so what we want to do at the community workshop really quickly. So we went over these 6 revitalization strategies, right? 6 for 4 specifically to this downtown. Now, only one of them has got to do anything with zoning and density changes and land use changes. Only one. All of the 5 other are about open space improvement, is about where capital projects are needed for better connectivity and safety. They're about business mix, and it is about how do you provide assistance for businesses to be able to improve and maintain the downtown corridor. So we're playing a game at the community workshop. It's called People, Places, and Things. This is a board called Places and Things. So things, imagine things to be the strategies, the 6 strategies that we have. But with each of the 6 strategies, what we've gone ahead and identified are these capital projects, right? So there's the revitalization guideline over there, which says reinforce the identity of South 4th and Gramerton Avenues as main downtown corridors. So here are some examples of things that we're looking at. And that's what we've heard from people, that there needs to be more signage, crosswalk to keep pedestrians safe. And so we're really, really getting down into the specifics of what are the things that are needed and where are they needed. And that is what will help us get to a finer grain of recommendations that are both physical as well as policy oriented for the downtown. So what people would do is be able to look at all of these capital projects that are associated with each strategy and be able to pin it in the downtown at specific places where they need it the most. And then on the next slide, what we want, so this is what they're doing here, right? We all want to be working with everybody to be able to do that. And at the next slide, we'll see that we want to have conversations about how they think this can happen, meaning are there existing partnerships, even if it is at a very, very early level within the downtown? Are you talking about improvements with somebody else, or are you maybe helping? Is the Merchants Association you mentioned that is meeting once in a month, right? What are the discussions that are happening there? Is there capacity for the Merchants Association to be able to take up something like, say, for example, streets cleaning or street closures for every weekend? So we want to start having conversations about who are the people in addition to the city government that can get involved, and how can they get involved? And if they are already doing something, then what additional assistance it is that they need in order to be able to do their work better? Because we do recognize currently that there is governance in their city government, but what we really want to gather and understand is what some of the community-based organizations that are active, or some of the associations that are active or are thinking about being active, and what's preventing them, and how can they become a part of the revitalization. So that's the goal of this, of the community workshop. Does that, any questions? Yeah. So it's really about the things that we want, the places we want them at, and who are the people, most importantly, because it is something we have not heard. And I really, really want to encourage the advisory committee meeting to get as many people who are, and community-based organizations who are active in their neighborhoods to come and participate in these conversations, because we think that those will be the most important conversations for downtown revitalization.
So this goes to the governance section that you discussed. So I know in the strategy and tactics that you laid out, and it was also discussed that we want to provide or create proof of concept. So part of proof of concept is developers want to see that agencies, government agencies specifically, have skin in the game before they then go. So some of I think our problem is the bond rating for Mount Vernon. So is that considered in your strategy and tactics to even move forward? Because the CBO is going to look for tax levy dollars from either the local municipality or the state. And neither wanted to put much skin in the game if you can't show that you're able to manage funds correctly. So is that your first thing that you're laying out in the governance concept?
So just like improving your own personal credit rating, there's no magic wand you can wave to immediately improve your municipal credit rating either. So when Moody's and S&P looks at your rating, they look at a whole bunch of things, your history of bill paying, your ability to raise revenue, all sorts of stuff. And I mean, it's really up to the administration to, have a good long working history of responsible financial management. That'll improve the credit rating. I'm thinking more along the lines of these things. First, you got to have in place a governance structure where the mayor is meeting internally with her team. That's a well-defined team that is going to be assigned to tackle tactics related to economic development, job attraction, retention, and growth, and downtown revitalization. You then have to identify for that team, whoever the members are. I mean, I could recite for you who I think they should be, but for whoever those members are, what they are meant to be doing. So, you're going to want to start with, right, changing your zoning is going to be one of the foundational steps, at the beginning, once you get the governance set up. Changing the zoning, updating the zoning so that, let's face it, the zoning that you have is pretty unusual when you compare it to municipalities similar to you across the rest of Southern New York, right? So getting that up to date is step one, very important. Again, I haven't shared this, but if I was looking at step two, there are certain state programs that provide incentives to places that have a critical mass of vacant properties and buildings or abandoned buildings and properties. The downtown would qualify for it just about better than any other place I can think of in the entire region. While you're getting that lined up, you can start to think about some of these city-owned properties. How many are there? 9, 10, 12, something like that? And that's in the ballpark, right? Some communities would kill to have control of that many properties, because every single one of those properties that the city owns is a domino you can tip to start creating momentum, right? Some places don't have a single domino they can tip. You got like 9 or 10, right? So I would start thinking about, okay, what is our vision for the things we want and need in the downtown so that we can begin to develop RFEIs for these vacant properties and send it out once the zoning's done and once the incentives are in place. Send these out there in a very prescriptive way for the things we want and need, to start getting proposals in for the things we want and need now that the benefits and the zoning are in place. At the same time, I'd then be applying every single year for a Restore New York grant that upgrades downtown buildings, does facade repairs, and I would just get them in every year, because once you have those one benefits in place and you're a disadvantaged community, you're almost guaranteed to get those things when you apply for them. And I just keep going on down the list of the things we need to do in the sequence we need to do them in. And then most importantly, assign them to people with deadlines and hold them accountable. If they don't get it done, they'll have a problem. That's what it means to have governance over stuff like this. And that's the sort of, yeah.
Conversation, and we definitely want to get to it. We definitely want to get to it, you know, in our recommendations, and that is a big part. We can have a great plan. We do want to figure out what is a 1-year strategy and how do you support it with 5-year and 10-year.
And to your question, as you start doing that stuff in the right order and show progress, the rating analysts take note of that. You know, they really do. So they all kind of go hand in hand, you know?
So kind of going back to all the things you just stated, I was going to ask if in the future we can have an advisory committee meeting along with maybe the mayor, parking bureau, whoever's involved with the zoning in the city, because I would hate for us to keep meeting and coming up with great plans. And then when we decide to bring everything to the table, we're getting pushback in certain areas because certain businesses or proposals aren't allowed. I'd rather us have that from the beginning, so that way us as a committee can continue to meet and work on what we can and can't do, and also create a better plan for the future and what we come up with as far as revitalization, what businesses we can actually have. Because if we keep even listening to the community and they say, hey, we want to have 5 new parks within the city, but within that area of what we're trying to work on, we can't get any of those 5 parks, for example, in that area, it's kind of like a letdown to them. And now we also have to keep going back to the drawing board to figure out what we can and can't do.
Right, and that is part of developing these recommendations. We are trying to get more and more specific with each step. And there will be, you know, as James mentioned in the timeline, there will be a plan which has higher level of resolution of recommendations, you know, where we're not just talking about blocks, but we're talking about actual places where these improvements can happen. Right, and it will be ready for review sometime in September. So that is when we can all review it and provide feedback. And part of the community workshop is also trying to get to that resolution of understanding of each block and parcel.
It's great what we're doing now.
The governance part of it is kind of going hand in hand with it. Hand in hand, and we will be able to you know, share with you what the sequence is when we have a clear understanding of what all of the recommendations that we are proposing are. So the first thing, I want to get to the implementation, but I don't want to, you know, rush to it. The first part is really looking at and still finalizing what it is we want, and then get to how do we do it. And governance is one aspect, you're right. So we're still in the stage where we are determining what exactly it is that we need.
Okay.
Well, and just to be clear, right, I mean, James is bringing, well, sorry, not just James, the entire department, right? They're in touch with us and saying, you got to think about this, you got to think about that. I mean, just right from the beginning, at the beginning of the meeting, we talked about 3rd Street, right, for a little while. And there was a lot of discussion that went between, and it brought in from the city council, from the mayor, from other departments. So that's happening, right? Are we saying we're going to get it perfect? And it probably not perfect, but I think the goal is to make sure those conversations are happening, right? So we're checking in with the city council, checking in with the mayor, checking in with the
Don't forget the
departments,
agencies.
the building department, and a lot of others. So we're building that in, because you're right. If you get to the end goal and they're like, well, you can't even do that, we got a problem. We're trying not to let that happen.
And so, yeah, more specifically, so as the planning department, we had a set of meetings across all the different departments to talk about what some of their challenges were, their goals and strategies for the year, so that as we were talking about designing this process, we were including their perspective in it. The consultants have also had direct meetings with the various departments, and we invite everybody to come. So actually, a lot of commissioners and other staff have actually been actively participating in the workshop as well, because yeah, we want to stay coordinated throughout this process as well. Yeah.
And specifically for when the advisory committee can review it, you know, that people section of the workshop is to see who outside of the governance structure can be included in it, you know, include them also in the mix, and then come back to you with our recommendations in September. So yeah, sorry I neglected to miss that, but we have had about, I don't know, at least a dozen meetings with each department or more, 24. Yes.
In terms of the difficult discussion around density, is there an amount or some kind of equation where the changes that in governance that Adam was outlining can get towards the critical mass such that it puts a limit on the amount of density that's needed? In other words, it's some of the things that you enumerated, these dominoes that can create revenue and change in character, they sound very highly impactful, and that they could actually be instrumental towards critical mass. And then all these high buildings or, you know, medium density, higher density are used to get, you know, I guess a tipping point towards critical mass. I mean, the interplay between these two things seems to go together.
So the governance again is, what are you going to do? Who's going to do it? What sequence are you going to do it in? As you get that in place, and your zoning ultimately determines the densities that you'll allow maximum, right? And where you'll allow them. But once you have the governance in place, then you can make sure then it's really about enticing, right? Because you can't you can't really tell a developer to come in and build this, you know, we want you to build this thing here, unless you own the property, which the city owns a bunch of them, which is not great, because the city came into possession of those through someone's hardship in many cases, but it's good in the sense that as you're starting a process to sort of bring your city in a different direction, you have a little more control than, say, the average place, right? But the density conversation, I was sitting here and listening to it, and I just, you know, I may not weigh in on this in the right way that you're all thinking about it, but it's important to understand again what your city is now. You have more than half of your neighbors are either walking to work, taking mass transit to work, or working from home. So you are increasingly a city that relies less on the motor vehicle. And guess what? Good for you. I heard someone say air quality. Density is better for air quality than anything else, because then it means people are doing more walking and more mass transit using motor vehicles less, right? If you have some of this density near your downtown, then all those restaurants that you'd like to come down have a better chance of surviving because they have more customers nearby. If we want to fight climate change, it's good to have density in places where you're fortunate enough to have, like, you're in one of the best drinking water positions of any city in the entire state, because you have an ability to tap the New York City water supply in an unlimited way, right? So you have a lot of things going for you that allow you to have density. Oh, by the way, your school district has shrunk by 28%, and you'd like to have some kids around because kids are your future workforce, and without a workforce, you don't have anything, right? So I would urge you to think about density a little differently than just tall buildings, right? Density is about climate change. It's about moving people around in a more efficient way. It's about having a future workforce and a vibrant community with people in it, right? So just try to reframe in your mind the way you think of density. Density can look a lot of different ways, but ultimately it's, are we going to have a vibrant community with lots of neighbors who have an opportunity to both rent and have ownership opportunities in the community? And oh, by the way, be patrons of all these businesses we like to have, right?
And I think it's also, when you talk about density, right, you want to talk about where the density is and what it looks like. Because no one's gonna say Mount Vernon is not a densely populated community. It is, right? We all know that. Do you have the density in the places that you want it right now? Some of it and some of it not. And I heard you, I don't know if you were about to say, but it's senior housing. The form, right? So the form and the design, that was gonna be the next thing I said, which is, what does?
It's not an
what is it-
informed, nothing's structured. It's not informed. There's no design to it.
Exactly.
So
Right.
that's our concern.
Yep.
Will we get more of the same in that
Right.
sense?
No.
And
I-
how do we implement those
That
design?
is. Are you a planner?
That is,
That
the-
just made
that
me
is
so
the-
happy.
Yeah, that is why.
Better, you actually do it, right? I just plan, you do. But that's exactly right. Like, where do you want it? What do you want it to look like? Does it need to look like New Rochelle? No. White Plains? No. It's gonna look like Mount Vernon. But I don't know what that looks like.
And also, to your point, is there an equation? There isn't an
I
equation,
wish
because
there was.
otherwise there would be, no, I'm so glad there isn't an equation. Because then every place would look exactly the same. And have exactly the same number of stories, or have exactly number of the, so, no, but I totally get what you're saying. Is like, when we're getting into the conversation, because I know everybody wants to arrive at, is it 20? Is it 18? Is it 12? I think it is a back and forth with, let's start somewhere with a range, and then let's look at it on a case by case basis also. Where does it really make sense? Where does it not make sense? But what the comprehensive plan would do is be able to then call out our vision through that's why the revitalization strategies are so important. The guidelines for revitalization, they're so important, because that is what gives us the direction to then, and they include not only changing the land use to have for critical mass, but they include a number of other things like new open spaces. How do we take vacant lots and use them for interim community-based uses? Who gets to maintain them? How do we have an interconnected system of open spaces? What does the downtown look like? And if we do have density along, the Metro North areas where the train stations are, then is it just a block of 18-story tall building? Or is it step back as you go up and the street wall is only 8 floors? And then it's stepped back by, 20 feet in, and then it goes up, similar to what you mentioned, that you've seen buildings like that, right? At other places that actually don't look that are not as overpowering in terms of their presence in the downtown. So yeah, I think that the design element is really important. I do know that James has an announcement to make.
Yes, well, we have, just gonna give more, about 5 minutes, but on this point, just remember, this process, I'll reiterate it, is a beginning. These are guidelines, these are recommendations. So while this is a community-led process, at the end of the day, the real work begins once the comprehensive plan is adopted. So things can be adjusted. It can be used as a foundation. We can say that, high density is capped at 15 stories, and then someone comes in with an 18-story building, but what they're bringing to the city is more open space and affordability and this, that. And we could zone, and this, I've seen this, being in the Bronx, where something is zoned for 10 stories and no one wants to build more than 4 because that's not what they're used to. It happened on Fordham Road, East Fordham Road. No one wanted to build the full 10 stories. So it doesn't mean like what is going to be recommended is what's going to be executed at the end of the day, because government has to follow after, and the work that, all community organizations and community groups and homeowners associations, that's the work, saying, well, this is what it allows, but what do we want to see about that? One part of this process, and that we emphasize during the RFP process, is that aesthetics are essential. They are essential. So it's not everything is the same. It's like you could limit, some things like, oh, we want to limit to 8 stories here. It was like, well, I want to build a gray concrete box with windows about this size and an entrance that can just fit a person who's like 6 feet tall. Are those things allowed? Sure, they're allowed. Is it nice? It's like, well, someone's like, well, I want to build 9 stories instead. I want to make it awesome. We are not, that's what I'm saying. It's not limited, and it has setbacks, and it has this, and it has amenities. So it might be a silly example, but that's the work, and that's the give and take that will be done over the course of 10 years. 10 years. It's just, things aren't going to happen overnight. It's the conversations that will take place in the communities and with government entities. And Talbert?
I'm hoping that what I'm going to ask goes to process here. Robin, you're still serving on the Architectural Review Board. So what I wanted to know, there's a lot of institutional knowledge on those boards. And I talk to some of the members. I'm constantly learning from them. They just, some of them as individuals, but overall as a group, as an institution, to me, they've accumulated a lot of insights. So I was wondering, have they been drawn into the process in terms of tapping that hopefully positive knowledge that they have come across in terms of some of the difficulties they have dealt with in terms of looking at projects, looking at approvals and what have you? Have they had a chance? And I say that also in complimenting, the organization here in terms of ferreting out the opinions and the positions of the developers. I thought that was good. I mean, I really learned a lot. Not to say I was in agreement with a lot of things that came out, but it's good to flush it out. You get an idea, kind of mentality that you got to deal with somewhere down the road. So I'm just asking that question, has that other source been tapped? You may well have done it, but I'd just like to know, have they been challenged as land trust groups to comment on this process, to offer their insights, difficulties and challenges that they've had?
Land trusts and such have been discussed, and there was an interest. I mean, before even this process, it was something we discussed with both the mayor and city council separately, potentially doing. And actually, we, the comptroller has, we've talked about city-owned land, and the comptroller is currently looking at ways to disseminate and distribute that land, because it shouldn't be on the city's coffers as long as it has. And the simple answer is like, begin the interim process and just put everything out to auction. And there is a consensus, like, we don't want to do that at this point. And so every elected body here has come to us and saying, what do you feel about community land trusts, and how do we set that up, and how do we do that? And part of that is reaching out to the organizations and working with churches and such, because there's such a big cohort, and they do have not-for-profit, a lot of them do have not-for-profit organizations that represents. So we've been doing best we can to make the rounds and incorporate it. But the idea of what you're saying when you mention land trust is something that we've thought about. Did I answer your question, or not quite?
I just want to make a mistake. Has the Architectural Review Board as a board, have they been tapped in terms of their input?
I mean,
the planning. Yeah.
Okay.
Land use. I meant land use. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, they are represented here. Just the land use boards chairs do have representation on this body, and we are in constant contact just throughout each land use board meeting of whether it's going to, moving forward on certain applications, will be in line with the comprehensive plan or will contradict the comprehensive plan. So I would say that it is an active conversation, active discussion, because certain boards more than others, there are applications that come before, and it's like, well, is this going to conflict with the comprehensive plan? And there's pretty vociferous debate about that. And in terms of, sitting down separately and, on a regular basis, no, we haven't sat and discussed a comprehensive plan on a regular basis with each land use board. But we would be open to if land use boards
So that would
want
just
to
be
on
a
a more,
suggestion
yeah.
that those boards be tapped. That their opinion, their projections, not to say that they should rule the day, but
A few things.
Yeah.
Recently in the Journal News, I don't know if you saw this just a few days ago, there was a very lengthy article about the emphasis now in city planning on the character of the city, that is becoming very, very important in terms of planning. Then I wanted to ask, the South Fourth Avenue Revitalization Partnership, is that something that is playing a role in all of this or not? Then another thing, regarding development on the south side and what you were saying, Robin, about there being so many senior buildings, might that be an area to consider townhouses, a community of townhouses, as opposed to where it's currently being discussed?
So, answer your first question, yes, context is everything. That's why I was saying with aesthetics, that's why we emphasized it, because just the overall aesthetic and, that's why we kind of began the discussion talking about South Fourth and Gramerton is just like maintaining that aesthetic as best as we can.
Clearly, and I think.
And it was questions just saying, well, if you allow development around it, does it create like a valley? And it was just like, well, yes and no. I mean, like 8 stories buildings aren't going to create huge shadows over 2, 3, and 4-story structures that exist. It's better than the random spot zoning that we've seen that's allowed 13-story buildings mid-block that has happened in previous years. And your second question was?
Oh, but I just want to say that doesn't have, I mean, this article doesn't have to contradict what it is you're talking about. The two should be working hand in hand.
Well, I'm not saying it
clearly.
contradicts, I said it complements.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the
There's several.
South Fourth Avenue Revitalization.
Yeah, so you're talking about
Partnership?
WCC and LISC?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That would be-
That's information, even though it's happening concurrently, it's
Yes.
information we're taking in and we're thinking about in terms of incorporating what those recommendations are in terms of what the landscape will look like, because there are specific recommendations just with
good.
lighting and facade improvements and to everything to, pedestrianizing South Fourth Avenue even more
Right.
than it currently is.
Okay, and
I'll just answer the housing question. So when we put forth recommendations in the housing section,
yes,
there will be a wide variety of recommendations for both rentals and different models of ownership so that people can find hopefully a place they can afford of every type at every at every
and
income
in
level.
that area that we're talking about.
I mean, it'll
It's
be
the specific
several.
area. She's
Yeah.
talking about a specific
Talking about
area
the south side.
around.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's talking about a specific area.
Yeah.
What was the block again?
Well, I get, what is
The-
it, South Third Street? Yeah, or South Third, where there has been issues. There's discussion now about attempts to develop. Is that? Yeah, and just, I may not even be able to be specific. It's just an idea as to that area, considering that sort of thing. Yes, and age diversity.
Right,
And so I just-
multi-generational and socioeconomic, yeah, more
yeah,
so,
yeah.
more mixed income, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's definitely,
Yes, yes.
yeah, yep.
to say. All right. When does the issue of industrial development come up?
In what aspect? Because I can.
As to developing location, bringing in industry and so forth? When in the scheme of things will that be an issue, a
It
topic?
will be addressed. Like industry is not something we necessarily want to run out of town. I mean, that's been a huge issue in New York City is the loss of industrial zones, because industrial zones, while are not the most attractive and not always the well-maintained, they bring important jobs, important revenue for the city. And so
Yeah.
the idea of mixed use is important. I know the city's experience with MX has not been the best, but, you know, mixed use can mean multiple things. It can be commercial and residential, and it could be also in New York City, when there's an MX zone in New York City, it usually means industrial and residential, that allows for some retail. And so there are some industrial property owners who have come to us saying, hey, we don't want to be kicked out. How do we make this work? And the administration has been extremely amenable, because like, we don't want to lose you while we want to change the character. How can we work together? And some of these businesses have said, we want to put our money where our mouth is. It's just kind of like, we want to complement the people coming in, and maybe we can do something, expand our industry while supporting other types of programming in the community, whether it be arts, education, sports, or something like that, brings folks in. And there's been models.
In the downtown, however, we're talking about some uses, and we have discussed some uses like studios and live workspaces. For studios that could be, at a smaller scale, and the artists could be working with not just, for example, not just pottery, but maybe other metalwork as well. So smaller scale, not necessarily at a mass production scale, but the downtown definitely is looking at other uses that can be accommodated within the downtown fabric. Maybe not on South Fourth. Directly, but adjacent to on the adjacent blocks and along East First.
But when it comes to industry in its sort of most traditional form, manufacturing, things like that, I mean, we know the face of that is changing, right? It's getting smaller, it's getting quieter, it's getting cleaner, it's changing what it looks like. You guys have an industrial core in this city that most small cities would kill for. And so when we get to that section after phase one, the question on the strategy there is going to be, what tactics do you apply to not only support the industry you have here now and that you want to keep, but understand who's in their supply chain that might benefit from being closer to them and co-locating or nearby locating and actually building that base stronger and wider. So that's contemplated, but not in this first go.
Really? Okay. And just finally.
Well, we need to wrap up.
Yeah,
because
this will just take a second, if you don't mind. As you were mentioning, the government or the administration cannot single-handedly make these things happen, but they play a very, very important role in creating the environment, the receptivity, the spirit to all that's going on.
Right.
And one thing that thinking about, the mayor does her weekly report. This comprehensive plan should have a place all the time, not just an announcement of a meeting, because people don't even know what that meeting is referring to. Finished.
Sure, there you go.
So thank you, everyone, and thank you for staying and your patience with this. Just want to remind you, June 29th, the second public workshop, Sinai Free Synagogue at 6:30 p.m. As with the first one, we are looking for volunteers from the advisory committee meeting. They were awesome. The folks who came out and helped were really great, and it's in the evening. Yes. Yeah. So we really appreciate your assistance, and because it helps us with the engagement, because a lot of these folks are your neighbors. And so you're able to connect with them in a way that, we are not able to, even though we have established relationships, folks around town. It's still good to see familiar faces and faces that you can trust to help guide you through the process. And so we're going to take this information back. And then after, as I mentioned, after the workshop on the 29th, we're going to be sitting all together and synthesizing all this information and just really rolling up our sleeves. This is where all the different sections that we've talked about, from housing to open space to zoning to transportation to design and such, will be laid out, will be in organized fashion, and then come September, it'll be ready for review and consideration by city council and such. So, am I missing anything, Catherine? All right. Well, yes, yes. Catherine will email you, and so please show up and please help out. And just, again, we thank you for your patience and your time this evening, and thanks for staying until 7:59. Have a good night.